Good day, everyone. So our lesson for today is Item Analysis Discrimination Index. If difficulty index tells the proportion of students who answered an item correctly, then what do you think discrimination index does? So before we go on with our topic, I want you all to answer this pre-assessment. Answer it in a 1/4 sheet of paper. Write T if the statement is true and F if otherwise. Now, why do you think we administer a test? Is it just to test their understanding about a certain topic? Maybe it is to find out who understands the lesson better, or it can be to find out who mastered the lesson or material and who was not. Will a test discriminate between the group better if each item on the test discriminates between those who did and did not do well on the test overall?
Absolutely. If more students do well on the test, overall answer an item correctly, which we call positive discrimination index, helps the overall discrimination ability of the test. If this is true for all items, the test will do a good job of discriminating between those who know their stuff and those who don't.
To the extent that students who do poorly on the overall test answer individual items correctly, which we call negative discrimination index, the test loses its ability to discriminate. Now, how can I tell whether the key for any question is chosen more frequently by the better students or the poorer students? This is where discrimination index enters. But before we go on with our topic, let me read first the objectives of our lesson. At the end of the lesson, the students will be able to identify the key components of the discrimination index and explain how it is used to evaluate the quality and effectiveness of test items. Evaluate the quality of test items using discrimination index data and justify revisions based on analysis. And lastly, analyze the relationship between discrimination index values and item difficulty to determine item effectiveness in assessment. So discrimination index is the measure of the extent to which a test item discriminates or differentiates between students who do well on the overall test and those who did not. The discrimination index range is between -1 and +1. The closer the discrimination to +1, the more effectively the item can discriminate between the two groups of students. So there is a formula for this, and if the result of the finding is way more closer to +1, that means the test item is effective or plausible. So the first step is arrange the papers from highest to lowest score. Place the paper having the highest total score on top and continue with the next highest total score, sequentially until the paper with the lowest score is placed on the bottom. Next, separate the papers into an upper group and a lower group based on total test scores. Do so by including half of your papers in each group. If there are several papers with identical scores at the middle of the distribution, then randomly assign them to the high or low distribution so that the number of papers in the two groups is identical. The use of 50% groups has the advantage of proving enough papers to permit reliable estimates of upper and lower group performers. For each item, count the number in the upper group and the number in the lower group that choose each alternatives. For example, there is 30 students divided into two. The upper half scorer are the upper group and the other half is the lower group. Then the fourth step is that record your information for each item in the following form. The following data are from the previous example, doon sa example ni Julia, and again the asterisk indicates the keyed option or yun yung tamang sagot. So here, record who in the upper half answered the item correctly and also in the lower half. As you can see, from the 15 upper group, there are 11 students who answered correctly and 7 students from the lower group who answered it also correctly. So the formula is D is equal to the number of students who got the correct answer in the upper group, subtract by the number who got the item correct in the lower group, divided by the number of students in either group. So if group sizes are unequal, choose the higher number. Plugging in our numbers, we arrive at D is equal to 11 minus 7 divided by 15 is equal to 0.267. So our discrimination index is 0.267, which is a positive. So our discrimination index is a positive discrimination. The last step is consider the difficulty index and the discrimination index. The difficulty index is P is equal to 0.60. Ito yung galing sa example ni Julia. Then the discrimination index is 0.267. So an item with P is equal to 0.60 and D is equal to 0.267 would be considered a moderately difficult item that has a positive desirable discrimination ability. But then, the item needs to be revised or improved. So as noticed, even though the difficulty index is just moderately difficult and it's a positive discrimination, it still need to be revised. There is a guideline for that. This is the guidelines for evaluating the discriminating efficiency of items. Here you can see that the result we get is still in marginal item or it needs improvement. And for it to be a good item, it needs to reach 0.40 and above. We have three types of discrimination indexes. Maybe kanina nalilito kayo bakit sinabi kong positive yung result. Siguro akala nyo because the result is positive, then it's already a given that it is a positive. Yes, that is also a clue, but there is more to it. So a positive discrimination index is those who did well on the overall test choose the correct answer for a particular item more often than those who did poorly on the overall test. So that means if mas maraming nakatama na upper student than lower students, that means it is positive, resulting to it to have a positive discrimination. On the upper group with 10 students, 9 answered it correctly, and in the lower group, only 3 of them answered it correctly. So plugging it in our formula, we have D is equal to 9 minus 3 divided by 10 is equal to 0.60. So as you can see, mas marami ang nakatama sa upper group, resulting to it to have a positive discrimination. And relating the result to the guidelines, the multiple choice given is a very good item. So there's a high chance na pwede mo pa rin tong gamitin na item sa future assessment na gagawin mo. So negative discrimination index are those who did poorly on the overall test choose the correct answer for a particular item more often than those who did well on the overall test. So dito mas mataas yung nakatama sa lower group than the upper group. You included a confusing question with tricky wording. So in the upper group with 10 students, only 3 got it correctly. But in the lower group, 7 answered correctly. Plugging it in on our formula, we get negative 0.40. Here, since the lower group got it higher correctly than the upper group, this equate to a negative discrimination. Then the test item should be eliminated. What I mean eliminated is that di mo na siya pwedeng gamitin pa sa susunod na assessment mo. What could be the reason bakit nga ba mas mataas ang nakukuha sa lower? There could really be a reason, just like what was stated in the scenario that the question is too confusing and tricky for the upper group. Maybe the lower student just guessed the answer, resulting to it for them or for the lower group to have a higher correct result than the upper. Maybe miskeying, luck, and etc. This is where the distractor analysis enters that will be discussed to us by Ms. Cargente. So the third type of discrimination index is the zero discrimination index or the non-discrimination index. These are those who did well and those who did poorly on the overall test choose the correct answer for a particular item with equal frequency. So ito yung chances na equal yung nakatama sa upper at lower group. In the scenario, you ask a very factual question. It results for the upper and the lower group to answer it correctly. So plugging it in our formula, it results to 0.00. So here's a simple chart showing how each type differs from each other. Here's an example with a class size of 30. So in here, mapapansin mo na talaga kung ano ang magiging result. having an upper group getting 4 correct and 10 in the lower group. Plugging all the information on the formula, we get the P or the difficulty level of 0.467, which is moderately difficult, and for D is equal to negative 0.40, which is the negative discriminating. So the item should be eliminated. So even if sabihin pa nating moderately difficult lang siya, it still needs to be eliminated since it favors more on the lower group. The different interpretation of treatment. So the purpose of discrimination index in criterion reference testing is that it determines whether the student meet a fixed set of learning standard. So in here, it just makes sure that the student meet a specific learning. While sa norm reference testing naman, yung purpose niya is to rank students in comparison to one another. So it compares students' performance to that of others. So in the aspect of focus of assessment, in criterion reference testing, mastery content or objectives. So kumbaga it focus on individual performance against a standard. Like for example, did the student master the skill of solving linear equation? So kumbaga mas kina-focus niya na ma-meet yung objectives mo or yung mastery ng student. Then, while on the norm reference testing, its focus is the relative performance among group. So, it compared the performance of the student. Like, did the student perform better than 75% of the class? So, in the aspect of use of discrimination, in the criterion reference testing, it is less critical. The item may show little discrimination if all students master the skill. So in here, D is less emphasized, but it's still helpful. It helps identify items that do not align well with mastery. Like mas mataas ang nakatama sa low group than upper group. Then it does not reflect the learning objectives. While on the norm reference testing, it is essential. Items should clearly differentiate high and low performers. So D is highly emphasized. If it have a high positive discrimination, then this contribute to accurate ranking of students. So kumbaga kung mas mataas yung discrimination, that means mas essential or mas effective yung test item. So in the aspect of interpretation, the zero or non-discrimination may be acceptable if all students succeed. So kumbaga here, kung lahat nakatama or equal yung sa upper and sa lower group, that means ang focus niya is na achieve nila yung learning standard or yung objectives. So na-master nila yung content, kaya naga-favor siya or acceptable ang zero non-discrimination. While on the other hand, sa interpretation ng non-reference testing, item with low or negative discrimination are flagged for revision or removal. So kung may low or negative na discrimination, need siyang i-remove or i-revise. Criterion reference testing, for example, is that all students answering a basic addition item correctly may reflect mastery. So, kumbaga, if lahat ng student nakatama sa isang item, then it is equal for criterion reference testing. That means na reach nila yung learning objectives. So, again, for example, if yung D natin is equal to 0.10, the item isn't helping distinguish mastery. May need revision or clearer alignment with objectives. While on the other hand, sa norm reference testing naman, ang example is only top students answering a logic puzzle correctly reflects good separation. So, kumbaga dito, makikita mo talaga na yung upper student is nag-excel because they can answer the puzzle correctly. So, example, again, if ang D natin is equal to 0.10, it does not help rank student and should be replaced. Diba kanina sa criterion, if ang D is equal to 0.10, okay lang siya na i-revise and align it with the objectives. Pero pag sa norm reference naman, if ang D is equal to 0.10, kailangan siyang change talaga. So in conclusion to that, the use of D is to ensure that the item reflects mastery and not all item must discriminate highly. Pero pag negative siya, it still indicates a problem. So parang accept lang siya if nasa zero or non-discriminating siya because it means na reach nila yung mastery ng content. While sa norm reference testing is that high discrimination is essential for maintaining test validity and fairness in students' ranking. So, dapat, the more higher the discrimination, the more mas mataas yung fairness ng ranking for student. So, what is the strength of discrimination analysis? First, it identify quality items. So, it helps spot which test items effectively separate high-performing from low-performing students. Then next, it improves validity and reliability because good discriminating item increase a test ability to measure learning accurately. Then, it supports item revision because it flags weak or misleading question for improvement or removal. Lastly, it guides fair assessment because it ensures that the test scores reflect real differences in understanding. So, if may strength ang discrimination index, meron din itong limitation. First, it affected by guessing. So, especially in multiple choice item, lucky guesses can distort discrimination result. Yun kaya nag-result minsan ng, kung lalo na pag confusing yung question, nag-result ng negative discrimination. Next is it is sensitive to item difficulty. Extremely easy or difficult item often show low discrimination even if they're valid. Just like sa scenario kanina ng zero or non-discriminating item, even if naging equal siya, it can still be revised or removed if, more importantly, nasa norm reference siya. Not always appropriate. In criterion reference settings, low discrimination might just indicate full mastery. Just like I've said kanina, pag nasa zero or non-discriminating indexes siya, kung sa criterion reference is okay lang because it tests their mastery. But then, if you look into it, pag sa norm reference, it does not test their critical thinking. So, kumbaga parang mastery nila ng content. Lastly, group size sensitivity requires a sufficient number of students in both high and low group for accurate analysis. So, kumbaga dapat meron tayong sufficient number ng students so that mas makita natin kung may discrimination. Moving on to the importance of discrimination index, it measures item effectiveness. It helps identify good test items. Those that students who understand the material can answer correctly, while those who don't usually get it wrong. Next, improve test quality. By analyzing discrimination values, teacher can revise or remove poor test items that don't function well, such as confusing, misleading, or too easy or too hard items. Next, it supports fair assessment. Items that discriminate well ensure that the test fairly reflects students' understanding, making grades and decision more accurate. Lastly, it reveals instructional gaps. If an item with a low or negative discrimination index is based on a key concept, it may point to areas where teaching strategies needs improvement. Like for example, sa item na yon is mas naging negative siya, naging negative yung discrimination, that means magbigay siya ng clue sa teacher na hindi pa siguro nila naintindihan yung lesson or confusing yung naging test item mo. So in here, I have an individual task and a group task that will be passed before our discussion. And that would be all. Thank you.